The thunderous hoofbeats echoed across the dusty prairie as Katherine Zimmerman clutched her dying father's hand, the old wagon jolting beneath them like a ship in a storm. It was 1873 in the unforgiving territory of Colorado, and everything she had ever known was slipping away faster than the setting sun behind the jagged peaks of the distant mountains. "Promise me, Katie," her father wheezed, his voice barely audible above the rumble of the wooden wheels. "Promise me you'll make it to Silver Creek. Your Aunt Margaret will take you in." Katherine nodded, tears streaking clean lines down her dirt-smudged face. At 22, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. The smallpox that had taken her mother and younger brothers 3 months prior had left her father weakened, and the pneumonia that followed had proven too much for his battered body. "I promise, Papa," she whispered, squeezing his rough hand. By nightfall, she was alone in the world, burying her father with trembling hands beneath a twisted juniper tree, marking his grave with a crude wooden cross. All she had left was the wagon, an aging mare named Penny, her father's pocket watch, and exactly one silver dollar coin, the last of their money after the medical bills and the long journey west. Silver Creek was still 2 days away according to the crude map her father had sketched. 2 days with no food and precious little water. 2 days for a woman alone in territory where danger lurked behind every rock and shrub. Katherine climbed back onto the wagon, wiping away her tears with a determined set of her jaw. "We keep going, Penny," she told the tired mare. "We keep going." The first day passed without incident, but as the second morning dawned, the wheel of the wagon caught in a deep rut and splintered with a sickening crack. Katherine climbed down, surveying the damage with growing despair. The wheel was beyond repair, and she was still hours from Silver Creek. "I suppose we walk from here," she told Penny, unloading only what she could carry and securing it to the horse's back. The rest of their meager belongings would have to be abandoned. They had traveled less than a mile when she spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Riders. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she led Penny behind a large boulder, praying they would pass by without noticing her. But luck was not on her side. 3 men on horseback slowed as they approached the abandoned wagon, then fanned out, clearly searching for its owner. "Found tracks heading this way," one called out, his voice carrying on the dry air. Katherine pressed herself tighter against the boulder, but Penny, exhausted and thirsty, let out a soft whinny. "Over there," another voice shouted. Moments later, she was surrounded by 3 dust-covered men with hard eyes and harder expressions. The leader, a man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, dismounted and approached her. "Well, well, what do we have here? A lady all alone in the wilderness." His smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "I'm just making my way to Silver Creek," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My aunt is expecting me." "Silver Creek's a fair piece away still," the man said, circling her like a wolf. "And that's some mighty fine gear you got there. That watch looks particularly valuable." His eyes fixed on her father's pocket watch hanging from a chain around her neck. "Please," Katherine said, backing away. "It was my father's. It's all I have left of him." The scarred man reached for the watch just as a rifle shot cracked through the air. The men spun around, hands flying to their weapons. "Step away from the lady," came a deep voice from atop the ridge. A lone rider sat on a magnificent black stallion, rifle raised. Even from this distance, Katherine could make out his broad shoulders and the glint of a silver star on his vest. "This ain't your business, mister," called the scarred man. "I'm making it my business," the rider replied, his voice calm but carrying a clear threat. "Now back away nice and slow." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their odds. The rider on the ridge had the high ground in the first shot. Apparently deciding it wasn't worth the risk, the scarred man spat on the ground. "Ain't worth dying over," he muttered. "Let's ride, boys." They mounted their horses and galloped away, throwing dust and curses in their wake. Catherine's legs nearly buckled with relief as the stranger rode down to meet her. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair was partially hidden beneath a worn leather hat, and the badge on his vest identified him as the law. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Yes, thanks to you," Katherine replied, trying to regain her composure. "I'm Katherine Zimmerman. I was traveling to Silver Creek when my wagon broke down." "Lucas Kane," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Marshal of Silver Creek. Lucky for you I was out tracking those fellows. They've been causing trouble up and down this territory." Katherine couldn't help but notice the kindness in his eyes, so at odds with his weathered face and the dangerous competence with which he handled his rifle. "My father died 2 days ago," she found herself saying. "I'm trying to reach my Aunt Margaret in Silver Creek." Marshal Kane's expression softened. "Margaret Thornton, the schoolteacher," Katherine nodded, hope flaring in her chest. "I know her well," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "I'm mighty sorry about your father, Miss Zimmerman. Let me help you get to town." "I don't have much to offer in payment," Katherine admitted, embarrassed. "Just this." She held out her last silver dollar, the coin catching the sunlight. Lucas Kane looked at the coin, then at her face, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. Gently, he closed her fingers back around the coin. "Keep it," he said softly. "You'll need it more than I do." There was something in the way he looked at her that made Catherine's heart flutter strangely in her chest. Despite the tragedy of the past days, despite her exhaustion and fear, she felt a curious warmth spread through her at his touch. "Thank you," she whispered. "Come on," he said, helping her secure her belongings to his horse. "Silver Creek's not far, and I know a place where you can get a hot meal and a safe bed for the night." As they rode together on his horse, Katherine holding onto his waist, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, in the midst of all her loss, she had found something unexpected on this wild frontier. The journey to Silver Creek took less than 2 hours, with Marshal Kane's strong horse carrying them both. Katherine tried to maintain a proper distance as she held onto his waist, but the rocking motion of the horse made it impossible not to press against his broad back. She was acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the way his muscles shifted as he guided the stallion across the rugged terrain. "Almost there," Lucas called over his shoulder as they crested a hill. Below them stretched a valley cradling a small but thriving town. Silver Creek itself wound through the settlement like a ribbon of light, with buildings clustered along its banks. "It's bigger than I expected," Katherine admitted, taking in the church steeple, the 2-story buildings along what appeared to be the main street, and the scattering of homes and businesses beyond. "We've grown some this past year," Lucas said with unmistakable pride in his voice. "The silver mine's been good to us, and we've got the railway coming through next spring if all goes according to plan." As they rode down the main street, Katherine felt the curious stares of townspeople. A woman alone, riding with the marshal, was bound to cause talk. She straightened her back and tried to look dignified despite her travel-worn appearance. Lucas seemed to sense her discomfort. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "Small-town folks are just curious by nature." He guided his horse to a whitewashed building with a neat picket fence. A sign hanging from the porch identified it as Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. "Your Aunt Margaret lives at the schoolhouse on the edge of town," Lucas explained as he helped Katherine dismount. "But Mrs. Wilson runs the finest boarding house in Silver Creek." She'll get you settled until we can let your aunt know you've arrived." The door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Marshal Kane," she greeted, then her eyes shifted to Katherine with open curiosity. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Miss Katherine Zimmerman," Lucas said. "She's Margaret Thornton's niece, just arrived from back east." Her father passed on the journey, and she could use a comfortable room and a hot meal if you have space. Mrs. Wilson's expression immediately softened. "Oh, you poor dear. Of course I have room. Come in, come in." She ushered Katherine inside with a motherly arm around her shoulders. "You look half-starved and dead on your feet." Katherine glanced back at Lucas, who remained on the porch. "Thank you again, Marshal. I don't know how, no need for thanks," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll let your aunt know you've arrived. She'll likely be by first thing in the morning." Before Katherine could say more, Mrs. Wilson had swept her into the warm interior of the boarding house, clucking over her like a mother hen. "Let's get you a bath drawn and some clean clothes," she was saying. "I have a beef stew on the stove that'll put some color back in those cheeks." The promised bath was heaven after days on the trail. Katherine soaked in the copper tub, letting the warm water soothe her aching muscles and wash away the dust and grime of travel. Mrs. Wilson had loaned her a clean dress, a bit loose in the waist, but otherwise serviceable, and even pressed her own travel-worn garments for the next day. The boarding house dining room was occupied by 4 other guests, a middle-aged couple who introduced themselves as the Hendersons, in town to visit their son who worked at the assayer's office, Mr. Perkins, a traveling salesman with an impressive mustache, and Miss Amelia Grant, a young woman who taught piano lessons to the town's children. Katherine ate the rich beef stew and fresh, baked bread with more appetite than she'd had in days, answering the polite questions about her journey with edited versions that omitted the worst of the hardships. "Marshal Kane is quite the hero around these parts," Miss Grant said with a knowing smile when Katherine mentioned how he'd rescued her from the bandits. "Half the unmarried ladies in town have set their caps for him, though he seems immune to their charms." "Miss Grant," Mrs. Wilson chided gently, "let's not gossip about the marshal at the dinner table." "It's not gossip if it's common knowledge," Miss Grant replied with a laugh. "Besides, our new friend should know the lay of the land." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "I assure you, I have no designs on the marshal or anyone else. I'm simply grateful for his assistance and looking forward to reuniting with my aunt." Later, in the small but comfortable bedroom under the eaves, Katherine lay awake despite her exhaustion. So much had happened in such a short time. Her father was gone, and with him, the life she had known. Tomorrow she would meet the aunt she barely remembered from childhood visits. What would her new life in Silver Creek hold? And despite her protestations at dinner, she couldn't help but think about Marshal Lucas Kane, with his storm-gray eyes and gentle hands. The way he had closed her fingers around her last coin, refusing payment for his help. Katherine drifted off to sleep with the strange thought that while she still had her coin, she felt as though something else had been taken from her, or perhaps given away in that brief moment when his calloused fingers had touched hers. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the lace curtains and the sounds of Silver Creek coming to life. Katherine dressed quickly in her freshly pressed traveling dress, eager to meet her aunt. She had just finished pinning her chestnut hair into a simple but neat arrangement when Mrs. Wilson knocked on her door. "Your aunt is downstairs, dear," she announced, "and she's brought company." Katherine hurried down the stairs, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. She hadn't seen Aunt Margaret since she was 12 years old. What if they didn't recognize each other? What if her aunt resented having to take in an unexpected niece? In the parlor stood a tall, slender woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair and kind eyes that immediately reminded Katherine of her father. Beside her stood Lucas Kane, his tall frame somehow seeming too large for the dainty parlor with its flowered wallpaper and delicate furniture. "Katherine," Aunt Margaret said, opening her arms. "My dear girl." Katherine stepped into her embrace, tears stinging her eyes at the familiar scent of lavender that brought back childhood memories. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered, "thank you for taking me in." "Nonsense," Margaret said firmly, holding Katherine at arm's length to examine her. "Your family. Where else would you go?" Her eyes softened. "I'm so sorry about your father. Charles was a good man, and I loved him dearly." Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Marshal Kane has told me what happened on your journey," Margaret continued. "It seems I owe him a great debt for bringing you safely to Silver Creek." Lucas shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "Just doing my job, madam." "Well, I've invited the marshal to join us for dinner tonight," Margaret announced, "as a small token of my appreciation." Katherine glanced at Lucas, who looked as surprised by this invitation as she felt. "That's kind of you, Miss Thornton, but—" he began. "I won't take no for an answer," Margaret interrupted with a smile that somehow managed to be both warm and steely. "6 o'clock at my cottage. Katherine and I will spend the day getting reacquainted, and you'll give us the pleasure of your company this evening." Lucas gave in with a graceful nod. "Yes, madam, 6 o'clock it is." After settling her bill with Mrs. Wilson using part of her precious silver dollar, Katherine gathered her few belongings and followed her aunt to the waiting buggy. Lucas tipped his hat to them both before striding away toward the marshal's office, his long legs carrying him swiftly down the boardwalk. "He's a good man," Margaret commented as they drove through town toward her cottage near the schoolhouse. "One of the best in Silver Creek, though he keeps to himself." "He was very kind to me," Katherine agreed, watching his retreating figure until they turned a corner. Margaret's cottage proved to be a charming two-story house painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. A neat garden filled with late summer flowers bordered the walkway, and a large oak tree shaded the front porch. "It's lovely," Katherine said honestly. "It's home," Margaret replied. "And now it's yours too, for as long as you wish." They spent the morning settling Katherine into the small but pretty guest room upstairs, which Margaret insisted would now be Katherine's room. After a light lunch of sandwiches and tea, Margaret showed Katherine around the schoolhouse next door where she taught the town's children. "The new term starts in 2 weeks," she explained. "I have 18 pupils this year, ages 6 to 14. You enjoy teaching?" Katherine asked, running her fingers along the neat row of desks. "Very much," Margaret replied. "Though I could use an assistant. The younger children especially need more individual attention than I can provide while teaching the older ones their algebra and literature." Katherine looked up in surprise. "Are you offering me a position?" Margaret smiled. "If you're interested. You had a good education, Charles always said so in his letters, and you would be paid a small salary of your own." "I would like that very much," Katherine said, touched by her aunt's thoughtfulness. Having work of her own, a purpose beyond being a dependent relative, eased some of the ache in her heart. As they walked back to the cottage to prepare for dinner, Margaret linked her arm through Katherine's. "Tell me about Lucas Kane," she said with a sidelong glance. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "There's nothing to tell. He rescued me from bandits and brought me to town, that's all." Margaret hummed skeptically. "And yet he rode out to my cottage first thing this morning to ensure I knew you had arrived safely, when a simple message with one of the shopkeepers would have sufficed." "He was being thorough," Katherine insisted, though her heart gave a peculiar flutter. Of course, Margaret agreed, a knowing twinkle in her eye. Just as I'm being thorough by inviting him to dinner. Despite her protests, Katherine found herself spending extra time preparing for dinner, washing her hair and styling it more carefully than she had that morning. She chose her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes from the few garments she had brought with her. When the clock on the mantel struck 6, a knock sounded at the door. Margaret answered it, welcoming Lucas with a warm smile. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing a clean white shirt and dark waistcoat with his usual denim pants. His hair was damp, as though freshly washed, and he carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Good evening, Miss Thornton," he said, handing Margaret the flowers. "Thank you for inviting me." "How thoughtful," Margaret said, accepting the bouquet. "And please call me Margaret. Miss Thornton makes me feel like we're still in the schoolroom." Lucas smiled, and Katherine was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his gray eyes. Then those eyes found hers and the smile changed, becoming something more private. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Marshal," she replied, suddenly shy. "And please call me Katherine." "Then you must call me Lucas," he said, "at least when I'm not on official business." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Margaret proving to be an excellent cook and an even better conversationalist. She drew Lucas out of his shell with gentle questions about his work and life in Silver Creek. "You're not from these parts originally, are you?" she asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. Lucas shook his head. "No, Madam Margaret, I grew up in Texas. My pa had a small ranch there." "What brought you to Colorado?" Katherine found herself asking. A shadow passed over Lucas's face. "The war changed things. When I came back, the ranch was struggling. Pa died soon after and there wasn't much left. I drifted for a while, worked as a deputy in a few towns before ending up here 3 years ago when the previous marshal retired." "And Silver Creek is lucky to have you," Margaret said firmly. "Not many lawmen would have the courage to face down 3 bandits alone to rescue a stranger." Lucas's eyes met Katherine's across the table. "Some things are worth the risk," he said quietly. After dinner, Margaret suddenly remembered urgent papers she needed to prepare for school and excused herself to her study, leaving Katherine and Lucas alone in the parlor. Katherine suspected this was a transparent attempt at matchmaking, but she couldn't bring herself to be upset about it. "Your aunt is quite a lady," Lucas said, standing somewhat awkwardly by the fireplace. "Yes, she is," Katherine agreed. "She's offered me a position as her assistant at the school." "That's wonderful," Lucas said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "The children will love you." "How can you be sure?" Katherine asked, curious. Lucas's cheeks colored slightly. "Just a feeling. You have a kind way about you." They fell into conversation about Silver Creek and its inhabitants, with Lucas painting a picture of the town and its people that made Katherine increasingly glad she had come. As the clock struck 9, he reluctantly said he should be going. "I have early rounds tomorrow," he explained. Katherine walked him to the door. In the narrow entryway, they stood closer than propriety might strictly allow, but neither moved to increase the distance. "Thank you again," Katherine said softly. "Not just for the rescue, but for—" She struggled to find the right words. "For closing your hand around that coin," Lucas supplied, his voice equally soft. Katherine nodded, meeting his eyes. "Why did you do that?" Lucas looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing his words. "Because some things can't be paid for with silver, Katherine. Some debts run deeper than that." Before she could ask what he meant, he touched the brim of his hat in farewell and stepped out into the night, leaving Katherine with more questions than answers and a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The following weeks fell into a pleasant rhythm, as Katherine settled into life in Silver Creek. She spent mornings helping Margaret prepare for the new school term, afternoons exploring the town and making acquaintances, and evenings sharing quiet dinners with her aunt. Lucas Kane was a frequent visitor to their cottage, often bringing news of the town or small gifts, a book of poetry he thought Katherine might enjoy, fresh fish he'd caught in the creek, or late summer berries from his own small garden behind his cabin at the edge of town. Katherine found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about Lucas that drew her to him, not just his handsome features, but the quiet strength he carried and the unexpected gentleness that belied his dangerous profession. The school term began, and Katherine discovered she had a natural talent for teaching. The youngest children, especially, responded to her patience and creativity. She found herself creating special lessons for them with colorful drawings and simple songs to help them learn their letters and numbers. "You're a born teacher," Margaret told her one afternoon as they walked home after classes. "The children adore you." Katherine glowed with the praise. "I enjoy it more than I expected. There's something wonderful about seeing a child's face light up when they finally understand something they've been struggling with." As they rounded the corner to their street, Katherine spotted a familiar figure waiting on their porch. Lucas, still in his marshal's clothes, his expression unusually serious. "Something's wrong," Margaret murmured, quickening her pace. Lucas stood as they approached. "Ladies," he greeted them, hat in hand, "I'm afraid I have some troubling news." Katherine's heart clenched. "What is it?" "Those bandits who accosted you on your way to town. They've been causing more trouble. Robbed the stage-coach yesterday about 10 miles south and shot the driver. He'll live, but he's in bad shape." "That's terrible," Margaret said. "But why come tell us specifically?" Lucas's eyes met Katherine's. "Because they made inquiries in town about the woman with the valuable pocket watch." "Seems they haven't forgotten about you, Katherine." A chill ran down her spine as her hand automatically went to her father's watch, which she wore on a chain around her neck. "Why would they bother? It's not even real gold, just gold-plated." "They may not know that," Lucas said grimly. "Or they might be nursing a grudge about being shown up. Either way, I want you both to be extra careful. Keep your doors locked and don't go anywhere alone after dark." "Surely we're safe in town," Margaret protested. Lucas shook his head. "I'm not taking any chances. I've asked my deputy to keep an extra eye on this street, and I'll be patrolling more frequently myself." His concern touched Katherine deeply. "Thank you for warning us," she said softly. Lucas nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'd never forgive myself if anything happened to you," he said, his voice low enough that Margaret, who had moved to unlock the front door, couldn't hear. The intensity in his gaze made Katherine's breath catch. For a moment it seemed as though he might say more, but then Margaret called from the doorway. "Lucas, won't you stay for dinner? It's the least we can do after you've come all this way to warn us." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, that would be nice." Over dinner, Lucas explained that he and his deputy, a young man named Billy Winters, were planning to organize a posse to track down the bandits. "We can't have them terrorizing travelers and stage coaches," he said. "It's bad for the town, not to mention dangerous for innocent folks." "When will you go?" Katherine asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Day after tomorrow," Lucas replied. "Need a day to gather men and supplies." Margaret excused herself after dinner, claiming a headache, though Katherine suspected she was once again attempting to give them privacy. This time, Katherine and Lucas moved to the porch, where they could speak without impropriety but still enjoy the cool evening air. "I don't like the idea of you going after those men," Katherine admitted as they sat side by side on the porch swing. "They seem dangerous." Lucas's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "It's my job, Katherine. I can't let men like that think they can operate freely in my territory." "Your territory," she teased, trying to lighten the mood. He smiled, the expression visible even in the dim light from the parlor window. "Figure of speech. But these people, this town, they depend on me to keep them safe." "And who keeps you safe?" she asked softly. Lucas didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "Never really thought about it that way before. Always figured that was just the risk that came with the badge." Katherine squeezed his hand. "Well, perhaps you should start thinking about it. There are people here who would miss you terribly if anything happened." "People," he echoed, turning to face her more directly. Katherine's cheeks warmed. "Yes, people. The townspeople who depend on you, my aunt who thinks very highly of you. And you?" Lucas asked, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. "Would you miss me, Katherine Zimmerman?" The directness of the question took her breath away. In the weeks since her arrival in Silver Creek, they had danced around their growing feelings with careful words and meaningful glances. Neither had been brave enough to speak plainly until now. "Yes," she admitted, her heart pounding. "I would miss you very much." Lucas's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "I've been trying to find the right words to tell you how I feel," he said. "I'm not a poetic man, Katherine, but something happened the day I found you on that trail. When you tried to pay me with your last coin, I knew I couldn't take it, not just because you needed it, but because what was happening between us was worth far more than silver." Katherine leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "What was happening between us?" "I think I was falling in love with you," Lucas said simply. "Still am, a little more each day." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at their simple truth. "Lucas," she whispered, not trusting her voice with more. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Katherine met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle yet held the promise of deeper passion. His hand slid from her cheek to cradle the back of her neck, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, connected in the quiet darkness of the porch. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "After we've dealt with these outlaws, we'll talk more about whatever this is becoming." Katherine nodded, her heart too full for words. She knew the danger he was facing, but she also understood his sense of duty. It was part of what had drawn her to him from the beginning, his unwavering commitment to protecting others. As Lucas stood to leave, Katherine rose with him, still holding his hand. "Be careful," she said. "You have something to come back to now." His smile in the darkness was like a promise. "I count on it, Miss Zimmerman. I count on it." The next day passed in a blur of activity as Katherine threw herself into her teaching duties, trying not to dwell on the danger Lucas would soon be facing. The children seemed to sense her distraction, but rather than taking advantage, they were on their best behavior, as though they understood that their teacher needed a peaceful day. That evening, a knock at the cottage door revealed Lucas, this time in his regular clothes rather than his marshal's attire. "I thought I might walk you to the town social," he said when Katherine opened the door. "If you're planning to attend, that is." Katherine had forgotten about the monthly social at the town hall, where the community gathered for music, dancing, and refreshments. Margaret had mentioned it earlier in the week, but with the news of the bandits, it had slipped Katherine's mind. "I hadn't planned to," she admitted. "With everything happening." "That's exactly why you should go," Lucas said. "The whole town will be there. You'll be perfectly safe, and it would do you good to enjoy yourself before." He trailed off, not needing to finish the thought, before he rode out tomorrow, possibly into danger. Before their newfound feelings were tested by separation and worry, Margaret appeared behind Katherine. "What a wonderful idea," she declared. "Katherine has been working so hard with the children. She deserves an evening of fun, and I've been telling her she needs to meet more people in town." Under their combined encouragement, Katherine agreed to attend. She changed quickly into her best dress, the blue one she'd worn for Lucas's first dinner at their home, and pinned her hair into a more elaborate style than her usual simple arrangement for school. When she came back downstairs, the look on Lucas's face made the effort worthwhile. His gray eyes darkened as they took in her appearance, and he seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "You look beautiful," he finally managed. Margaret, already dressed in her own best gown, smiled knowingly between them. "Shall we?" she said, picking up her shawl. The town hall was decorated with lanterns and fall flowers, and a small band played lively tunes at one end of the room. It seemed everyone in Silver Creek had turned out for the occasion, from the oldest residents to babes in arms. Katherine was introduced to dozens of people, all curious about the new schoolteacher's assistant who had caught the marshal's eye. "Lucas never brings anyone to the social," whispered Mrs. Baker, the baker's wife, as they stood near the refreshment table. "You must be special, dear." Before Katherine could formulate a response, Lucas appeared at her side. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally, though his eyes twinkled with private amusement. The band had struck up a waltz, and couples were taking to the floor. Katherine placed her hand in Lucas's, allowing him to lead her to the center of the makeshift dance floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as they began to move with the music. "Everyone is watching us," Katherine murmured, acutely aware of the curious glances from all sides. "Let them watch," Lucas replied, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "I'm too busy looking at you to care." Katherine laughed, relaxing into his arms. "Where did a frontier marshal learn to waltz so well?" "My mother," he admitted. "She insisted her sons would be gentlemen, even if we lived on a Texas ranch miles from anywhere. Said she wouldn't have us embarrassing her if we ever made it to a proper dance." "I wish I could have met her," Katherine said without thinking. Lucas's eyes softened. "She would have liked you, strong, kind, not afraid to speak your mind." They danced in comfortable silence for a moment, the music wrapping around them like a private cocoon despite the crowded room. "When I come back," Lucas said suddenly, his voice low and serious, "I'd like to court you properly, Katherine, if you're amenable." The formal phrasing made her smile despite the gravity of his expression. "I am very amenable, Marshal Kane." His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." The evening passed in a whirl of dancing, conversation, and laughter. Katherine found herself enjoying the company of the townspeople, who welcomed her warmly as both Margaret's niece and the marshal's special friend. By the time they walked home under the star-filled sky, her cheeks hurt from smiling. At the cottage door, Margaret tactfully went inside first, leaving Lucas and Katherine a moment of privacy on the porch. "What time do you leave tomorrow?" Katherine asked, reality intruding on the magical evening. "First light," Lucas replied. "With luck, we'll be gone no more than 3 or 4 days." Katherine nodded, trying to hide her worry. "I'll pray for your safe return." Lucas reached for her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm before closing her fingers around it, much as he had done with the coin on the day they met. "Keep that safe until I get back," he said softly. "Along with your heart." "Both are yours already," Katherine whispered, standing on tiptoe to press a quick kiss to his lips. "Come back to me, Lucas Kane. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised. The following morning, Katherine rose before dawn and went to the window that overlooked the main street. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could make out a group of men gathering in front of the marshal's office. Lucas was easy to spot, taller than most and standing straight as he addressed the others. She watched as they mounted up and rode out of town, her heart following the broad-shouldered figure at the front long after he had disappeared from view. The next 3 days were the longest of Katherine's life. She threw herself into her teaching duties with forced enthusiasm, but her thoughts constantly strayed to Lucas and the dangers he might be facing. Each night she stood at her bedroom window, watching the road into town, hoping to see riders returning. On the 4th day, just as school was letting out, she heard a commotion in the street. Rushing to the door, she saw a group of horsemen riding slowly into town. Her heart leaped at the sight of Lucas at the head of the column, then plummeted as she noticed he was slumped forward in his saddle, his shirt darkened with what could only be blood. Katherine didn't remember running into the street, didn't hear the children calling after her or Margaret's worried voice. All she knew was that Lucas was hurt, and she needed to reach him. The riders stopped in front of the doctor's office, and 2 men were carefully helping Lucas from his horse. His face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes found hers as she pushed through the gathering crowd. "Katherine," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Told you I'd come back." "What happened?" she demanded, reaching for his hand. "One of them got off a lucky shot," Lucas grimaced as the men helped him toward the doctor's door. "It's not as bad as it looks." "Let the doctor be the judge of that," she replied, refusing to release his hand as they entered the building. "Dr. Wilson misses." Wilson's husband was already waiting, having been alerted by the commotion. "On the table," he directed the men, then turned to Katherine. "Miss Zimmerman, you should wait outside." "I'm staying," Katherine said firmly, meeting the doctor's surprised look with unwavering determination. Lucas squeezed her hand weakly. "Let her stay, Doc. She's important to me." The doctor raised an eyebrow but didn't argue further. "Very well, but stay out of my way." The next hour was a blur of bloody bandages and tense concentration as Dr. Wilson extracted a bullet from Lucas's shoulder and stitched the wound. Throughout it all, Katherine held Lucas's other hand, whispering encouragement and wiping his brow with a cool cloth when the pain made him break out in a cold sweat. "You're the strongest man I know, Lucas Kane," she told him when a particularly painful moment made him grip her hand with bruising force. "And I love you for it. So you hold on and let the doctor fix you up, because I'm not done loving you yet." Lucas's eyes, hazy with pain, fixed on hers. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you," Katherine repeated, not caring that the doctor could hear, not caring about anything except the man before her. "I love you, and you're not allowed to die before I've had a chance to properly tell you so." A ghost of his usual smile crossed his pale lips. "Not planning to die, madam. Got too much to live for now." Finally, the bullet was out, the wound cleaned and bandaged. "You're a lucky man, Marshal," Dr. Wilson said, washing his hands. "Another inch to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "What about the bandits?" Katherine asked as the doctor prepared a dose of laudanum for Lucas's pain. "Got them all," Lucas said, his voice stronger now that the ordeal of surgery was over. "They won't be troubling anyone else." "Good," Katherine said fiercely, "because if I ever see them again after what they did to you, I might not be responsible for my actions." Lucas actually chuckled at that, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "My fierce Katherine," he murmured, the laudanum already taking effect. "Always trying to protect everyone." "Someone has to protect the protector," she replied softly. Dr. Wilson cleared his throat. "He needs rest now. He can be moved to his own place once the laudanum wears off a bit." Katherine nodded, reluctantly releasing Lucas's hand. "I'll be back soon," she promised as his eyes drifted closed. Outside, she found Margaret waiting with Mrs. Wilson. Both women's faces creased with concern. "He'll be all right," Katherine told them, the relief in her own voice palpable. "The bullet's out, and Dr. Wilson says he was lucky." "Thank God," Margaret said, embracing her niece. "And how are you, my dear?" Katherine realized she was trembling now that the immediate crisis had passed. I don't know, relieved, terrified, happy." Mrs. Wilson patted her arm. "Love's like that, dear, especially when you love a man who wears a badge." Katherine didn't bother denying it. "Yes," she said simply. "I suppose it is." The news of the marshal's injury and the capture of the notorious bandits spread through town like wildfire. By evening, it seemed everyone in Silver Creek knew not only about Lucas's heroism, but also about the schoolteacher's assistant who had stayed by his side through surgery, declaring her love for all to hear. Katherine found she didn't care about the gossip. Let them talk. All that mattered was that Lucas was alive and on the mend. Dr. Wilson insisted Lucas remain at the doctor's office overnight for observation, so Katherine returned home with Margaret, promising to come back first thing in the morning. She slept little, her mind replaying the terrifying sight of Lucas slumped and bloodied in his saddle, alternating with the memory of his eyes locking on hers as he fought through pain. Morning found her at the doctor's office before the town had fully awakened. Lucas was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert, his left arm immobilized in a sling. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said when she entered, his face lighting up in a way that made her heart skip. "How are you feeling?" she asked, taking a seat beside his bed. "Like I was shot," he replied with a wry smile, "but better now that you're here." Katherine rolled her eyes at his attempt at humor but couldn't suppress her own smile. "You frightened me half to death yesterday." Lucas's expression sobered. "I'm sorry for that, but not sorry I went. Those men needed to be stopped." "I know," she acknowledged. "It's who you are. I wouldn't change that about you, even if I could." He reached for her hand with his good arm. "Did you mean what you said yesterday about loving me?" Katherine met his gaze steadily. "Every word." "Good," Lucas said, "because I've been in love with you since the moment you tried to pay me with that $1. Never met a woman with so much courage and dignity in the face of hardship." Katherine's cheeks warmed at his praise. "What happens now?" she asked. "Well," Lucas said, his voice taking on a formal tone that was belied by the twinkle in his eye. "Once I'm back on my feet, I'd like to speak with your aunt about courting you properly. And then, if you'll have me, I thought we might discuss a more permanent arrangement." Katherine's breath caught. "A more permanent arrangement." Lucas's fingers tightened around hers. "I'm not a wealthy man, Katherine. I have my salary as marshal, a small cabin at the edge of town, and some savings. But I can offer you a home, my protection, and a heart that's entirely yours." "If that's enough—" "It's more than enough," Katherine interrupted, tears springing to her eyes. "It's everything I could want." The door opened then, and Dr. Wilson entered, eyebrows rising at their joined hands and Katherine's tear-filled eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said dryly. "Just proposing marriage," Lucas replied with a straight face. "Nothing that can't wait for your medical attention, Doc." Dr. Wilson shook his head, but Katherine could see the smile he was trying to suppress. "If you're well enough to propose marriage, Marshal, you're well enough to go home. But you'll need someone to keep an eye on you for a few days." "I believe that can be arranged," Katherine said, exchanging a look with Lucas that held promises of a future neither had dared to dream of just weeks before. Later that day, Lucas was installed in his cabin with Katherine and Margaret taking turns watching over him. The cabin was small but well built, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. The furnishings were simple but of good quality, and everything was meticulously clean. "It's not much," Lucas said apologetically as Katherine looked around. "It's perfect," she replied honestly. "It feels like you." Margaret, who had gone to prepare dinner in the small kitchen area, called over her shoulder. "It could use a woman's touch, though." "Some curtains, perhaps a rug or two." Lucas caught Catherine's eye and smiled. "I believe that can be arranged as well." As Lucas recovered over the next weeks, Catherine divided her time between teaching, helping Margaret, and caring for her marshal. The town watched their courtship with approving eyes, and even the most conservative matrons couldn't find fault with their behavior, as Margaret served as a constant chaperone. One evening in early October, as the aspens turned golden on the mountainsides, Lucas took Catherine for a walk along Silver Creek. His arm had healed enough that he only wore the sling when the weather made the old wound ache. They stopped at a bend in the creek where a large, flat rock overlooked the water. Lucas helped Catherine sit, then lowered himself beside her. "I've been thinking," he said, watching the water flow past. "A dangerous pastime," Catherine teased. He smiled, catching her hand in his. "Agreed. But necessary sometimes." He turned to face her fully. "I spoke with your aunt last week, officially asking her blessing for our marriage." Catherine's heart leaped. "And what did she say?" "She said it was about time I stopped dancing around the subject and made an honest woman of you," Lucas replied, his expression both amused and tender. "She also said she's known since the night of the town social that we were meant for each other." "Aunt Margaret always was perceptive," Catherine murmured, hardly daring to breathe as Lucas reached into his pocket. "I had this made in Denver," he said, producing a small box. "Deputy Winters brought it back for me yesterday." Inside the box nestled a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the late afternoon sunlight. "Katherine Zimmerman," Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but courage and that silver dollar. You've brought more joy into my life than I ever thought possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Lucas Kane, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face to kiss her with a tenderness that spoke of promises and tomorrows. When they returned to the cottage, hand in hand with Catherine's new ring catching the light, Margaret took one look at their faces and burst into happy tears. "Finally," she exclaimed, embracing them both. "Oh, I've been holding this news in for a week, ever since Lucas asked for my blessing." "When's the wedding to be?" They decided on a date just before Christmas, giving them time to prepare while the weather was still good enough for travel. Lucas's mother had passed years ago, but he had a brother in Texas who promised to make the journey for the wedding, and Margaret had friends and distant relatives who might attend if given enough notice. The following weeks were filled with preparations alongside their usual duties. Catherine continued teaching while sewing her wedding dress in the evenings. Lucas split his time between marshal duties and expanding his cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living area to create a home suitable for a family. The entire town seemed invested in their happiness. The women organized a quilting bee to create a wedding quilt for the couple. The men helped Lucas with the cabin expansion, turning what might have been weeks of solitary work into a few days of community effort. Even the children at school contributed, creating a book of drawings and well wishes for their beloved teacher and the marshal. As December arrived, bringing clear, cold days and star-filled nights, Catherine found herself counting the days until she would become Mrs. Lucas Kane. She had come to Silver Creek with nothing but a broken-down wagon, a tired horse, and her last silver dollar. Now she had family, purpose, community, and a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. 2 days before the wedding, as Catherine was putting final touches on her dress, a knock came at the cottage door. Opening it, she found Lucas standing there, holding something small wrapped in a handkerchief. "May I come in?" he asked. "There's something I want to give you before the wedding." Margaret, who had been helping with the dress, made a transparent excuse about needing to check on something at the schoolhouse and slipped out, leaving them alone in the parlor. "What is it?" Katherine asked, as Lucas sat beside her on the settee. He unwrapped the handkerchief carefully, revealing her silver dollar, the same one she had tried to pay him with the day they met. "I've been saving this for the right moment," he said, placing the coin in her palm. "Do you remember what I did when you first offered this to me?" Katherine nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "You closed my hand around it and wouldn't take it." "Because I couldn't take your last coin," Lucas said softly. "But there was more to it than that, though I didn't fully understand it myself at the time." He closed her fingers around the coin once more, his larger hand enveloping hers. "Something happened in that moment, Katherine. It was like I was closing my hand not just around a coin, but around my heart, giving it to you to keep." Tears filled Katherine's eyes. "Lucas, I want you to have this back," he continued. "Not as payment, but as a reminder of where we started, of how far we've come, and as a promise that whatever hardships life brings us, we'll face them together." Katherine leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held all the words she couldn't speak past the emotion closing her throat. When they parted, she whispered, "I'll treasure it always." "We could have it made into a necklace," Lucas suggested, "so you can keep it close." Katherine smiled through her tears. "I'd like that. A reminder that some things are worth more than silver." "Much more," Lucas agreed, drawing her close again. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow dusting the ground like a carpet laid especially for the occasion. The small church was filled to capacity, with what seemed like the entire population of Silver Creek in attendance. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated the pews, and candles cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Lucas waited at the altar, looking handsome and somewhat nervous in his new suit. When the church doors opened and Katherine appeared on Margaret's arm, in place of the father who could not be there, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the congregation. Katherine's dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin that she had sewn herself with Margaret's help. Around her neck hung a small gold pendant containing her silver dollar, transformed by the town's jeweler into a keepsake that caught the candlelight as she moved down the aisle. As Margaret placed Katherine's hand in Lucas's, both bride and groom had eyes only for each other. The minister's words washed over them as they spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When Lucas was instructed to kiss his bride, he did so with such tenderness that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. Katherine's silver dollar pendant pressed between them, a physical reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous and boisterous, with dancing, feasting, and so many well wishes that Katherine felt overwhelmed by the community's generosity. Lucas stayed by her side throughout, his hand finding hers whenever they weren't actively engaged with guests. "Happy Mrs. Kane," he murmured as they finally took a moment alone near the end of the evening. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you, Marshal Kane?" "I'm the luckiest man in Colorado Territory," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her temple. Later that night, after the celebrations had ended and they returned to what was now their home, the expanded cabin glowing with warmth from the fireplace and decorated with Katherine's feminine touches, Lucas carried his bride across the threshold in proper tradition. Setting her gently on her feet in the middle of their living room, he gazed down at her with eyes full of promise. "Welcome home, Katherine Kane." Katherine reached up to touch his face, marveling that this strong, kind man was now her husband. "Home," she echoed. "I've been searching for it since I lost my family. I never expected to find it in a person rather than a place." Lucas caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You'll always have a home with me," he vowed, "wherever life takes us." As snow began to fall outside their window, blanketing Silver Creek in pristine white, Katherine and Lucas sealed their new beginning with a kiss that held all the promise of the years to come, years that would bring joy and sorrow, challenges and triumphs, but always, always love. 5 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of their home, no longer the small cabin, but a proper house on the edge of town, watching as Lucas taught their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter Elizabeth clung to Katherine's skirts, giggling as her brother bounced precariously in the small saddle. "Careful, Lucas," Katherine called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their third child grew. "Don't let him fall." "He won't fall," Lucas assured her, his hand steady on the pony's bridle. "A Kane needs to learn to ride almost before he can walk." Katherine shook her head, smiling despite her worry. Lucas was the most careful of fathers, for all his insistence on raising their children to be strong and independent. Silver Creek had grown in the years since their wedding. The railroad had indeed come through as promised, bringing new prosperity and new settlers. Lucas had been elected sheriff of the entire county 2 years ago, a position of greater responsibility but also greater stability. Katherine still taught at the school alongside Margaret, though she took time away when the children were born. The silver dollar that had started their journey now hung in a frame on the wall of their parlor, a constant reminder of how far they had come. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Katherine would touch it gently, remembering the desperate young woman she had been and the brave marshal who had closed her hand around her last coin, offering dignity instead of charity, respect instead of pity. "Mama, look," Thomas called, sitting up proudly as Lucas led the pony in a small circle. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, my brave boy," Katherine called back, her heart swelling with love for her family. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Lucas's arm around her shoulders and the children playing quietly nearby, Katherine felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Lucas asked, noticing the shimmer of moisture on her lashes. "I was just thinking about that day on the trail," Katherine said softly. "How close I came to never finding this happiness, if you hadn't come along when you did." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I did." "And you did try to pay me with your last coin," Katherine laughed softly, "and you closed my hand around it instead." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas murmured. "Well, that and asking you to marry me." As twilight deepened around them and the first stars appeared in the sky, Katherine leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. From desperate beginnings had come this abundance of love and family, this life rich beyond any wealth she could have imagined when she arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but a silver dollar and hope. "I love you, Lucas Kane," she whispered. His arms tightened around her, drawing her and their unborn child closer to his heart. "And I love you, Katherine Kane. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." In the gentle Colorado night, with their children's laughter carrying on the breeze and the promise of many years still ahead, Katherine knew that no coin, silver or gold, could ever measure the true value of what they had found together in the heart of the Wild West.